Welcome, Internet, to Psychoanalytic Talk. And today we're going to be talking about The Real by Lacan. So, before we start, I just want to say that some while ago I linked a video which I found very good by Plastic Pills that I feel did real justice to the concept and explained it in very good terms. So that's like basically a theoretical explanation of the concept, and I don't think it can get as good and as simple as that. So shout out to that channel again and to that video if you're ever interested. So I'm going to go more on a clinical side of things, meaning more like how and what happens during therapeutic relationships, or with the therapeutic process more in its own when the real occurs. So, very simply, I'm going to start by defining the real, and I'm going to explain what are the clinical ramifications of its impacts. So, let's go. Very simply, the real, if one can ever say it's simple, with Lacan, of course, is that the real is what is beyond meaning. It is what, in the end, breaks down the psyche, destroys it. For Lacan, and it's very interesting to note that for him, the psyche, the whole of your personality, the whole of your being, the whole of everything you ever were, is anti-real, meaning that it's built to just protect you from the experience of meaninglessness and complete self-annihilation. And when I'm talking about self-annihilation here, I'm talking about everything that you are just melting at the contact of the real. So the real is like some kind of fire that would melt everything down if it came to contact. It cannot be stopped or prevented. It has often been mistaken for trauma. It isn't trauma, not technically speaking. It's what goes beyond trauma. Like the traumatic events can be replaced in meaning. The real, whatever happens, can never. It's like this undecipherable, unintegratable phenomenon that has no way of being contained by the mind. So the only way that the mind can deal with it ever so slightly is by just fending off against it again and again and again and forever. Problem is, when there is a traumatic event or something that threatens the very being of the individual, that real is going to come back full force and break down to a certain extent the psyche and the mind. So the mind is very, very fragile to the real. This real is, in a way, one of the hardest things to deal with clinically, as it touches on both the personality, the integrity, and even the will of the individual. Like everything gets impacted by it, and it can vary from person to person. Of course, the real is not going to impact everyone in the same way, because the real is one of those things that is very idiosyncratic to every single person, and even more so when there are, for example, psychotic fragilities. As you all know, I assume, but I'm just going to say it just in case, that for Lacan, the psychotic breakdown is linked to the return of the repudiated or the foreclosure. It's something that was expelled. So it's like it becomes part of the real, right? Because it's expelled of the mind. It goes into something that's ununderstandable for the individual, or beyond understanding if you prefer. It's something that's gonna come back because there's a signifier that's gonna link that precise element to the real. In the case of people, for example, let's say with schizophrenia, it's going to come back through the shape of a delusion. That delusion is the bringing back of the real itself. That's completely like breaking down the psyche through the impact. And you can see that the breakdown of the psyche is the breakdown of reality, of the perception of reality, of others, and of the mind itself. As in psychotic processes, everything can be potentially true. Like, for example, there can be a sense of grandiosity. There can be also a sense of deprivation, there can be hallucinations, there can be so many things that are in the breakdown of the, and that's the whole point, that breakdown is the effect of the real on the mind. The mind is basically just so vulnerable to the real that everything is there to be fended off against. The mind in of itself is an apparatus built to save us from the experience of the real. And it's also one of the big reasons why Lacan, for better or worse, rejects the idea of a false and true self, or a persona and true self. Because basically for Lacan, there's no such thing as true self. Because you're lying to yourself about who you are, not consciously, of course, I mean, not necessarily, right? But it's like if there's a mask and then there is like an amalgamate of drives that pseudo pretend to be people and to be a person. What I mean by that is that it's a bit like if every single human was like Pinocchio, like a little puppet running around pretending he's a real boy. That's exactly what it is. Your mind is tricking you into believing you're a real little boy, and the real is what shows you in the mirror that you're not, and you never will be. So it breaks down everything that has ever been built, because the real is beyond understanding, and something of our condition that can never truly be understood, and it's beyond reality, and it even kills reality in a way. Our psychic reality, of course, right? As I'm taking a step in philosophy, but the idea is that we never really perceive reality because our perceptions are flawed. Well, our perception of reality is reality itself to us in our eyes, and the real kind of like breaks that, because there's no more reality when you can't even make sense of who you are or what is happening to you. And I think that that's very important to really understand that this moment is a moment where psychotic manifestations of intense nature can occur. That doesn't mean that the person is necessarily psychotic, of course, but it's something that just is meaningless, because at the moment where it breaks, the mind really tries to do its utmost to, as an emergency, try and build back the bricks, and it makes for an external observer, look at it as if like the edifice had no structural meaning. A bit like how, for example, after when a traumatic event occurs, someone can have a completely ununderstandable reaction that's just beyond understanding, and that's something that affects potentially everyone. As when the psyche breaks down, what is being built as an emergency is what it is. It's an emergency building, and it's not a good structured one. There's also this strange fantasy that some people are built for the real. No one is built for the real. It's just that the degree of suffering might differ if you're constitutionally better or worse, or mentally better or worse, and your mental health and a whole range of stuff. But no one can like do well when the real impacts. Not even people like sociopaths or psychopaths. They do terribly as well, like everyone else. So no one wins for Lacan on these planes. Everyone is just at the same level. So the problem is, if the real is completely mind-breaking, literally, so what can a therapist ever do or try to do to help the individual? Well, I would say that the impact of the real is something that's incredibly hard to work on, as sins for the patient have broken down, are meaningless. But that doesn't mean that the meaning can't be rebuilt, or that the meaning is wrong, because that's not what it means. It just symbolizes the collapse of it. But what is collapse can be rebuilt. Here, before I was talking about emergency rebuilding, The therapy isn't going to be an emergency rebuilding of the phenomena, of the psyche. It's going to be layers upon layers, done correctly. People can regain a meaning and a semblance of control of their lives. And they can start pushing back against the real again. But it's only with an immense investment both for therapist and patient that these phenomena can occur, because what you have to understand is that once the real has entered, it's something that's extraordinarily resistant and resilient to any form of psychotherapy, as basically the person has the feeling of void and of truth that's linked to the void. Like that the void is the... I'm using void, but it's not really a void, but that's what it kind of represents, at least to me. And that void, the person might feel that it's the truth, but it's not necessarily the truth. It's what has happened more than a universal truth. And regaining a sense of meaning re-enrolls a person in a sense of humanity, in a sense of collectiveness. That's so important and so adamantly fundamental to regain some form, semblance of peace of mind and a structured mind. And I will also say, as a criticism, because even though I find the concept incredibly interesting, I don't fully agree with it. Like, I don't think it completely breaks down the psyche as Lacan tries to say. I just think it pokes hole into it. I know I've said in this video, but I was basically taking the part of Lacan. Now I'm taking my opinion, right? My very personal, very idiosyncratic opinion, right? So for me, it's more about poking holes. Yes, the real passes through, but it doesn't completely destroy. And even in cases of psychotics, I would say that even then, not everything has been broken down. And I do think that with the right amount of care, things can be rebuilt, reknitted or contained. I don't see it as how he sees it as a fundamental destruction. I feel that it's something that's always going to be at risk, a bit like death. Death is unavoidable, yes, but that doesn't mean that everything that's done or redone doesn't have a fundamental, wonderful meaning. And it's that wonderful meaning, again, my point of view, that's there to be gained in therapy. And that's what I think it should always be. There should always be at least some form of hope that it can be rebuilt even after the advent of the real. So I hope you liked this video. As you know, I'm not a Lacanian, so I might be a bit off, right? But that's my therapeutic point of view as a psychologist that was trained by Lacanians, but has chosen a different point of view, even though the ideas remain fundamentally interesting. Anyway, if you have anything you'd like to ask, feel free to put them in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!